Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Connector Sessions with Dr. Mark Daley. Are you smarter than your laptop? My name is Galen Tobin Vanden Heuvel, and I'm the Executive Director of Western Research Parks. We're thrilled to have you join us today in this virtual format. Your participation is what makes this event special. The Connector Sessions aim to foster collaboration and knowledge sharing within our innovation-driven community, and we are proud to partner with the London Economic Development Corporation to bring these valuable discussions to you. Today, we're excited to explore the fascinating world of artificial intelligence and its impact on our lives and industries. This is an opportunity not only to gain insights from one of the leading experts in the field, but also to connect with fellow attendees who share your interests. Thank you once again for being here, and let's make this session interactive and enriching. Before we dive into the session, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that Western Research Parks is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lippinnawak, and the Attawandaron peoples. We honor their enduring relationship with the land and express our heartfelt gratitude for their stewardship, which inspires us as we gather here today. Today's event features a keynote address from an exceptional leader in the field of artificial intelligence, Dr. Mark Daley. As Western University's first ever Chief AI Officer, he is at the forefront of integrating AI into our academic framework, making Western the first university in Canada to house such a pivotal role within its senior executive team. Dr. Daley is not only a visionary, but also a key influencer in the landscape of AI research and development. His remarkable contributions have earned him a spot in Maclean's magazine, Power List of 2024, highlighting him as one of the top 100 Canadians shaping our nation. Dr. Daley's work transcends academia. He's actively engaged with industry leaders and policymakers, ensuring that advancements in AI benefit society as a whole. Dr. Daley's keynote will explore the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence and their impact on our world. So now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Mark Daley. His expertise, passion, and vision for the future of AI are truly inspiring, and we are honored to have him with us today.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. So conversation today is going to be of a fairly general nature, but I'm going to talk to you from my position in higher education because that's my industry. But I think a lot of what we discuss today is going to be applicable sort of to all of humanity and across all of human endeavor. So I start with this chart to set expectations really low because people think like, oh no, a plot on the first slide. So hopefully the rest of the talk's a little better. There's only really two things you need to take from this plot. The y-axis there is log scale, and what you see is, especially since 2017, a straight line going down. And what that means is that deep neural nets are becoming increasingly competent over time at an exponential rate. You also notice that the little bubbles are getting bigger, which means that these models, as they become increasingly competent, are also getting bigger. And that means they require additional power, additional data to train them. But we're humans and we like visual things. So visual representation is actually a little easier for us to understand viscerally. 10 years ago in 2014, Ian Goodfellow and Joshua Bengio invented the generative adversarial network, and GANs could generate images of human faces that didn't actually exist. They were novel human faces. And here in 2024, you're all looking at that picture on the far left-hand side and saying, Mark, that's pretty sad. But in 2014, we were mind blown in computer science. Even though it's low resolution, black and white, it's just the face. No one had ever been able to do this before. This was a revolutionary new technology capable of things that no previous technology had ever been capable of. Just 3 years ago, in 2021, OpenAI released Daley, which was, again, a landmark moment in computer vision. It was the first time we had a really competent text to image generator. You could just type in what you wanted to see, and there it was. And again, unbelievable excitement in the computer science community and beyond. The artistic community started to take notice of this. But looking at that now, you can see those two people's faces have a lot of problems, right? Like this actually isn't a very good image. And then just last year, evolution of the same type of technology that was in Daley 1, but an open source branch of it, Stable Diffusion XL, which is now actually 2.5 generations old. You can see a really, really realistic looking human face generated completely de novo. So what you're seeing here is sort of the visceral in images pace of improvement and change in deep neural networks. This is a chart from the Stanford report on AI for 2024, looking at a variety of different skills that we once thought were sort of unique to humans. Like these are things that only humans could do. We certainly didn't expect that machines would be able to do them. And I'm going to pick on one of them over at the very far right there, competition level mathematics. So the International Math Olympiad is a place where the very best and brightest young people go to compete. The problems are incredibly hard. They're written in natural language. They require a great deal of creativity and knowledge of mathematics and experience with mathematics to be able to solve. A lot of math profs can solve 0 of 7 of the questions on there. And if you're a young person who goes and gets a gold medal at the International Math Olympiad, your life is set. Caltech and Princeton and other top schools will be falling all over themselves to recruit you and give you a scholarship. Prior to 2021, there was no computer on Earth that could even approach IMO level work, could compete in a math Olympiad. And we didn't necessarily know prior to 2020 that we would have that in our lifetime. And then between 2021 and 2023, we went from no computer can do this to computers can do this about as well as an average human. Not quite. And then in July of this year, Google DeepMind entered their alpha-proof alpha geometry into the International Math Olympiad, and it won a silver medal, was 1 point short of gold. Most human beings on planet Earth would get 0 out of 7 of the questions on the International Math Olympiad. So we now have an AI. So in the span of time from 2021 to 2024, we have gone from this is impossible with a computer to the computer is now competing with the most exceptional human beings that we have at this particular task. Of course, AI models can't do everything. There's a weird jagged frontier where they do some things really well, and there's other things they just can't do. So they're definitely not a replacement for humans. It's just that we're surprised at some of the things they can do. But there's also red herrings in there too. So there's a lot of people who are very interested in focusing on what AI can't do. And that's sort of like an insight into someone's personality. Instead of saying, hey, like chainsaw is amazing for cutting down trees, I'm going to focus on the fact that it's actually really lousy for writing a letter to my mom, carving in the paper. It's not fit for purpose. But there's also technical errors you can make if you're not careful. So a few months ago, the big thing on social media was people saying large language models can't even count the number of R's in the letters in the word strawberry. And so here's an example with GPT-4o. How many R's are there in strawberry? And it says 2. And it's like, nope, that's not wrong. And it just keeps getting it wrong. And so, this blew up on Twitter and Reddit, and people said, look how dumb AI is. It can't even count the number of R's in strawberry. But if you actually know how the technology works, that's not telling you that AI is dumb. It's telling you that the people propagating this meme are ignorant. So a large language model does not ever see the actual text that you've entered. The very first thing that happens to your text is something called tokenization. And tokenization is where we take strings of characters like ing and reduce those down to a single symbol. And we do that because if you're compressing English text, ing appears really frequently. So it makes sense to sort of just have one symbol for that rather than three. But also that symbol has a lot of semantics. Very often when I see ing, if I see a verb stem and then ing, this is probably a present participle, which is actually semantic information. So that's also important to encode. What the LLM actually sees is tokens, which looks kind of like the emoji barf on the right-hand side there. So when you say count the number of R's, it never actually sees the R's, which is why it has trouble with that task. And so that's not evidence that these models are dumb and incapable. It's evidence that people rendering judgment on the models don't understand enough about how they work to be able to appreciate that. So if you do understand it, you can just change your input so that each character gets an individual token instead of being compressed. And then ChatGPT can answer the question with no problem. There's 3 R's in strawberry. This is Lee Sedol. Lee Sedol is one of the top players of the game Go ever to live, and widely acknowledged as one of the most creative. In 2016, DeepMind challenged Lee Sedol to a match against their AI that played Go, AlphaGo. And Lee Sedol eagerly accepted. And in media interviews, he was very, very confident. And he said, I'm going to win all 5 games. And I'm going to win because no machine could ever match the intelligence and the intuition of a human Go player. So I'm just going to take all 5. It's going to be fine. And he lost the first 3 matches. He ended up only winning 1 out of 5. And you have to remember that this is with 2016 technology. So in terms of the pace of deep neural net research, that's almost like closer to writing on clay tablets than it is to today. In July of this year, New York Times did a profile on Lee Sedol, and the headline is "Defeated by AI, a legend in the board game Go warns, get ready for what's next." So what's next? I can't see the future. None of us can, but I do believe in strategic foresight as a useful tool. And strategic foresight allows us to say, I don't know what the future is going to be, but I can imagine multiple possible futures, and probably it'll be one of those. And then I can prepare for a set of scenarios. And the 2 most likely scenarios with AI right now are, in one scenario, we hit a plateau. We will hit a plateau at some point for sure, but the plateau is sort of happening right now. And we've got what we've got, and that's already disruptive and really exciting, but we're not going to see much improvement in the short term. The other scenario is that plot I opened with continues for another 2 or 3 years, and we get continued improvement. So even as we're trying to grapple with what the technology can do today, it is gaining more and more competencies at a rapid pace. It's been popular since ChatGPT came out in the fall of 2022 to write doom headlines saying, AI is done. It can't progress any further because the models are going to be so big that it'll take like 3 years to get an answer. Or the story is AI has hit a wall because there's no more data to train it on. We've run out of data. Or the story is AI can't progress because TSMC can't fab enough GPUs. There's not enough microchips in the world to train AI. Or the story is AI uses too much power and we just won't be able to power these things. And those make great headlines and they get a few quotes from experts. But if you actually interrogate those statements and do the numbers, what you find is that the first constraint you're going to hit is in fact the power constraint. The other ones are further off in the future. And you're not likely to hit that until 2030. And it's also true that you only hit that if we assume that there are no further advances in the efficiency of training and running inference on deep neural networks. And that's a big assumption because if you just look over the past year, we've seen a 97% decrease in the energy cost of training and running neural networks. And that's because there are huge economic incentives for that. So there are tens of thousands of really smart engineers working on that problem. So even in the most pessimistic of worlds, it is likely that we have the rest of this decade for continued advancement in the capability of these models. There's different ways of classifying capability of AI models. This one is from OpenAI, so it is, of course, as much marketing as it is science, but I grabbed it because all of these frameworks are roughly equivalent, and this one got picked up by Bloomberg a couple of months ago, so a lot of people have already seen it. So they decompose AI capability down into 5 levels: chatbots, reasoners, agents, innovators, and organizations. And so I'm going to use that as the framework for the rest of the talk. So chatbots, even though they still feel new and fresh, are actually the past. Level 1 is the past. We still have level 1 with us, but it's no longer even the present. So how has level 1 affected me as someone who teaches? Bill Gates, over 18 months ago, said that AI is going to be as good a tutor as any human ever. And so it's now more than 18 months since then. And there are some ways in which AI is definitely a better teacher than me, but there are other things that I think I can do as a human teacher that AI can't do. So I don't totally agree with Bill Gates, but I see what he's getting at, and we're going to see some examples of that. If you're interested in evidence, there are now thousands of papers in the open literature, some studying K-12, some studying higher education, some studying corporate education and employee training, where they've actually done the controlled study and said, okay, does AI help, hinder, or what does it do when we bring it into the classroom? And the consensus result from all of these studies is if you deploy it intelligently, AI can help people learn, in some cases enormously. If you deploy it poorly, then it can hinder learning. And what the correct way to deploy it is really depends on your context. Even in a higher ed context, the way you would use AI in a first-year history course is really different than the way you'd use it in a fourth-year biochemistry course. But there's now literature where you can go and see, my colleagues have done this, they've tried it, and they've got the statistics to say this intervention seemed to work and this intervention did not seem to work. Anecdotes are easier for us to process as humans. So here's one where I've taken Anthropic's Claude and I've said, I would like a course outline for a course on the Hurrian language. And I picked Hurrian because it's a very obscure language. It's a poorly attested language from the ancient Near East. There's really only one good reference grammar for it. As far as I know, there's only ever been one university course taught on it at the University of Chicago in 2012, and the website's long gone. So I picked something really obscure and said, okay, give me a course outline for Hurrian. And it did. You'll be shocked to know I don't speak Hurrian or read it, but I have a friend, Emily, who is an Assyriologist, and so I sent this to her, and she said, there's some things I'd change about the course outline, but those are really like matters of personal style. I could teach this course just as it is. So if generative AI is already at a point where for a topic as obscure as the Hurrian language, it can pull together a pretty reasonable program of study, structured program of study for me, imagine what it can do for something like helping my 12th grader with calculus. I spend a lot of time in the role I'm in right now interacting with our undergrad students, and I love that. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. And they already know all this. But here, based on a true story that was relayed to me by one of these undergraduate students, I have taken the course outline for our second year electric circuits course. If you want to be an electrical engineer, then this is a course you have to take. Very few people love it. It's difficult. the material is super dry, and it's that wonderful combination of this is essential and it's really boring and it's kind of hard. So here I am as a student who dumps the course outline in and says, Chat GPT, I confess I'm a bad person. I haven't been to class ever. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and my exam for this course is today. Help. And what it did was triage the material in the course using what it already knows about electrical engineering, the topics in the course outline I provided, and what it knows about how professors construct exams, and said, okay, here are the things you need to learn in order of what's going to get you the most marks on the exam. And it did a really good job. It provided me with, yep, those are absolutely what I would tell a student to do. So then I said, okay, let's do it. And I went back and forth with it for about 20 turns, and it did a really good job of tutoring me on that material. And so, beyond just this is a good tutor, there's a couple other things I noticed, which is, one, it didn't judge me. At no point did the AI say, like, Mark Daley, you are a morally bad person. I'm so ashamed of you for not going to class. It just rolled up its sleeves and started helping me. And people laugh when I talk about this in person. But actually, when I talk to our students, this is one of their favorite things, is they feel like I can interact with the AI and it's not judging me because it's not a human. And so I actually tell the AI things I wouldn't even tell my best friends, because my friends would judge me, and like, it's just a computer. I don't care if it judges me. So that affordance is actually really important. The other thing I noticed is that here at simulated 2 o'clock in the morning, the AI was way more friendly and charitable than I would be if a student called my mobile phone at 2 o'clock in the morning, the day of the exam, and asked for a private tutoring session. But it's not just that type of accessibility. Partway through our conversation, I asked ChatGPT, "Nihongo ga wakarimasu ka?" And it said, "Yep, sure, I speak Japanese." And it just fluidly switched to tutoring me in Japanese. More than 12% of our undergraduate students here at Western do not speak English as a first language. This isn't Google Translate. Google Translate is one and done. You take a document, you put it in, you press go, and you get the document out. This allows me to interact with, ask follow-up questions about my course material in a language that feels like home to me. So I'm not adding to the cognitive load of difficult material by also trying to access that difficult material in a language that I'm not completely fluent in. This is my favorite slide in the whole deck, because I've shown you some anecdotes, I've given you some opinions, now I have some data for you. If you look on the right-hand side, that is a plot of the level of play amongst human Go players, professional human Go players from 1950 to 2021. And what you notice is that from 1950, and probably long before that, to the mid-2010s, the level of play is relatively stagnant. There's some variance and there's a few outliers like Lisa Dole, but pretty much it's flat when you average it out. And that fit with our expectations. Go was millennia old, really deeply culturally important in some parts of the world. And so we felt like this is a solved game. We know the major strategies. We know how to train young people to be exceptional Go players. Like we it's a really hard game and it's a really creative and fantastic game, but we've kind of got it figured out as humans. And then something happened in 2016. And what happened in 2016 is AlphaGo beat Lisa Dole. And within a year, most of the top professional Go players started training against AI. And after 70 years of stagnation, all of a sudden, the level of play amongst human professional Go players starts going up, rapidly so. This isn't humans playing against computers. This isn't humans playing aided by cheating with an AI on their phone. This is human versus human play. they're training against the AI, like you would run on a treadmill. But when it comes to play, it is still human versus human play. And what we see is that by 2021, the worst professional Go player is now playing at a level that is equivalent to what would have been the best professional Go player for the previous 70 years. So I know the whole world is not Go, unless you're a Go player, and then you're going to tell me that philosophically, actually, yes, the whole world is Go. But it's really easy to measure in an abstract strategy game things like how well people are doing. And so what we have here is evidence that on a cognitively challenging task that humans have recognized as cognitively challenging, after stagnation and how far the human brain can go, by training against an AI tutor, by training with an AI tutor, humans are getting better again and rapidly getting better. And this isn't just any group of humans. These are the very, very top humans in the world at what they do. So if AI tutors can do this for people who are already at the peak, imagine what they can do for regular people like me. Research is another big part of what we do at the university. And so let's take a look at how AI is impacting research. There's some really nice results lately. Earlier this year, DeepMind and MIT discovered a whole new class of antibiotics. We live in a world where people still die from antibiotic-resistant bacterial infections. And so this is a real good, and this would not have been discovered without a human AI collaboration. Really nice op-ed just a few weeks ago from the director of the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, talking about how the use of AI in modeling of fusion reactors has pushed the field forward faster than any other innovation. And he feels really optimistic that we are right on the threshold of truly green fusion-based energy. It's really worth reading the op-ed. Of course, he's also arguing for funding for his laboratory, so there's some self-interest there. This one was important to me because I'm a theoretical computer scientist, and they solved some problems that I had worked on as a grad student, collaborating with an AI, and the AI actually had some really creative ideas for how to solve the problems. I have some more examples, and usually when I give all these examples, they're very STEM-based examples, and the humanists and social scientists in the audience are starting to feel really smug at this point in the conversation, thinking, okay, so like STEM researchers are going to get replaced by robots, but we're fine, right? Well, this is a really cool study that was done on 70 unpublished papers drawn from across a cut of social sciences, so economics, psychology, sociology. What was common about all of them is they all used a survey-based methodology. And the 70 papers had to be unpublished because they didn't want there to be any danger of the AI having been able to peek into the result. If the paper had been published, it might have seen it in its training set. And so what they did was, for each paper, they replicated the demographics that were surveyed in the paper by asking GPT-4 to inhabit the persona of the people who had taken the survey. So, GPT-4, you are a 23-year-old unemployed machinist's mate living in northern Ohio. You have the following political beliefs. This was your upbringing. Now take this survey. And so one for one match, they simulated the actual demographics of the people who had been surveyed and got GPT-4 to fill out the survey. And what they found was a Pearson product moment coefficient of 0.85 between the AI simulated survey and the actual survey results. And it varied a little bit depending on discipline, but not all that much. Now, I'm not saying that we should replace human surveys with AI. There's a lot of problems there. But what I am showing is that it is likely possible to use AI, even as we have it right now, as a first test for your survey. It would allow you to do iterative survey design. It would allow you to just say, I've got an idea. I wonder if this survey is even worth doing, and then run it through the AI, knowing that this is not equivalent to a human survey, but it's sort of going to give you a rough approximation of what you might expect. And I did not expect this result to be as powerful as it was, but when I reflect back on it, the largest large language models, the frontier models right now, have been trained on sort of some rough approximation of everything humans have ever written. So they've read and internalized every theory of how humans behave and how humans think. And they've also read every piece of nonfiction and fiction, every piece of literature on human behavior. And so they're able to aggregate all of that. And this is a really, really shocking and interesting result. Another cool result, this also works from an educational standpoint. Anthropic's Claude 3.5, you can just take a scientific paper, dump it in, and say, generate an interactive dashboard for me that will teach me about the paper. So not even summarize the paper for me, like create an activity for me to learn about the paper. And if the activity is too hard, you can say, oh no, actually, like I'm a 10th grader and I only know how to factor polynomials. Can you make it for me? And it can do that, no problem. So all of a sudden we have a tool for taking scientific literature that is gate kept behind a huge necessary tower of abstractions that you have to learn your way through before you can even start to read it, or you have to have an expert who can translate it for you. Now you can just take that, dump it into a tool and say, make me an interactive activity that will teach me about this. You're not going to understand it on the same level as an expert who can read every line, but you're going to be able to get the gist of it. Researchers don't like this result so much, but in a violation of Bettridge's law of headlines, this paper is titled, "Can Large Language Models Provide Useful Feedback on Research Papers?" And the results were absolutely yes. In fact, what they found was GPT-4 was a more reliable reviewer than any single human. The only thing that was more reliable than GPT-4 was a group of human reviewers. So it's a good thing we usually do peer review in groups. That's the past. We are now in the era of reasoners and agents. And what does that mean for us? So I want to come back to the International Math Olympiad, because that result for alpha geometry and alpha proof is a really big deal. And it's such a big deal that when Alpha Proof won that silver medal, Nature published a little opinion piece on it and said that, this is a big deal in AI development. To put a really fine point on this, I'm going to take a quote from Tim Gowers. So Tim Gowers is a pure mathematician, Fields medalist. Fields Medal is the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for mathematicians because there is no Nobel Prize in mathematics. And probably one of the 20 most important living mathematicians today. He won his Fields Medal for combining functional analysis with combinatorics, which, if you are not a mathematician, is kind of like combining peanut butter and trout and producing the most delicious dish ever consumed by a human. So like staggeringly bright human being. He was one of the evaluators, one of the judges at the IMO who judged DeepMind's entries into the contest. And a week later, being interviewed on the BBC, he said this: "I'm quite relieved to be at the end of my career. Computers will be able to solve unsolved mathematical problems, and when that happens, it will be a very strange moment. I feel peculiar about my legacy if the things I did with so much effort become things that you can do in no time at all on your laptop." So keep that in the back of your mind. In August, Japanese-based or Tokyo-based company called Sakana, collaborating with two Canadians at UBC, released their AI scientist. And they focused the AI scientist on the field of machine learning because it's good to disrupt your own field first before you go and disrupt other fields. And this model comes up with ideas for, here might be cool projects in machine learning. Then it goes and does a literature survey, like a good grad student, pulls together the literature surveys, ranks all of its ideas based on which ones it thinks are the most interesting, takes the top most interesting ideas, fleshes out experiments, codes up the experiments, runs the experiments, goes through that iterative loop of, okay, I've got experimental feedback, and I'm going to modify my experiments. When it's happy that it's got a result that it thinks is interesting, it writes up the analysis into a paper, submits the paper to mock peer review, incorporates the mock peer review feedback, and then at the very end gives you a paper. And the initial paper that they announced this in, they had 15 purely machine generated papers in the appendix, and 5 of them were not very good, but I've seen people defend master's theses for less, so not totally unvaluable. 5 of them were kind of mid, and 5 of them could have got into some pretty good conferences because they were genuinely novel contributions to the field. None of them are going to win a Fields Medal or a Turing Award at this point, but it's an interesting observation that the only human intervention here was to create this software and then to press go. Everything else was entirely machine generated. And when you run the numbers, it costs about $5 in compute time per paper. And so I read this and thought, when I look at the output of my research group, it costs more than $5 a paper for me and my students to produce a paper. Software engineering, same type of thing. We are seeing more and more agents that can do the work of a junior software engineer. So SWE Bench is a benchmark for taking a large code base in a repository like GitHub, and this agent comes in and looks at complaints, so tickets, and says, okay, I'm going to try to resolve these. And the best agents we have right now can resolve about 43% of fairly simple bugs in a large code base. That's nowhere near 100%. They're not performing at the level of good human software engineers, but it makes my quality of life as a developer so much higher. If 43% of the things I would normally have to fix by hand, I can just press a button and they're fixed right away. This is a tweet worth clicking on and watching the video. This is an 8-year-old who in 45 minutes goes from, I have an idea for an app, she wanted to be able to talk to Harry Potter, to I have a working app. She doesn't know how to program, doesn't know Python, sat down with Cursor, which is an AI integrated development environment, just talked to it in natural language and got the app that she wanted. And it's not just that she got the app, it was also watching her interact with the AI and how much she learned in that process. Because at first she just says, oh, I just want this, and the AI can't, it's way underspecified. So it asks follow-up questions. She gets frustrated when it's not paying attention, can't read her mind. So she actually has to articulate in clear language. So she's learning a ton about critical thinking, about how to specify requirements clearly. And she doesn't even realize she's learning all that stuff. Like, can you imagine going up in front of a room of 8th graders and saying, okay, we're going to learn about requirement specification and clear, rigorous, logical thinking? They're not going to be that thrilled. She learned it viscerally, and at the end had an app that did what she wanted, and she had a sense of ownership and creation of that app without having to have spent 2 years learning to program in Python. 2 weeks ago, OpenAI released their O1 models, which combine large language models with reasoning. They're kind of like mini versions of the DeepMind AlphaProof that did so well in the International Math Olympiad. The problem with AlphaProof is running a single query on it can take like 60 hours and requires a supercomputer, so it doesn't really scale. OpenAI has found a way to scale sort of a miniature version of that. And some of the initial reactions to that have been pretty strong. Rob Griest is a professor of engineering at UPenn, and he got the mini version of O1 to come up with a creative result in a theorem he was trying to prove. And what he highlights here isn't just that, like, oh, wow, it was actually able to come up with what I think is a correct proof. It's that its approach was creative. It was an approach that he himself did not see. And he's just so delighted, like, wow, I've got an always on super smart buddy that I can riff mathematical ideas with, and it's creative. YouTube video of a science influencer taking questions out of a physics textbook, graduate physics textbook, putting them right into O1 and saying, solve this and walk me through the solution. And it does really, really well. And you can watch him stream it on YouTube. So you can see that, you know, this isn't manufactured. This is really the model doing these things. Probably the strongest statement in terms of the power of this model comes from Terence Tao. Terry is another Fields medalist, and in my estimation and many other people's, the most important living mathematician today. His accomplishments are enormous. And so after playing with O1 for a while, Tao says, the experience is roughly on par with a mediocre graduate student. And you have to understand that if you're a mediocre grad student to Terry Tao, you are probably actually pretty good. But the really important thing here is he said, the previous model, GPT-4o, was incompetent as a graduate student. So we've crossed through a threshold from doing pure mathematics at the level of Terry Tao. AI up to this point had been incompetent and really didn't add a ton of value, to all of a sudden it's like having a mediocre grad student. And you don't need to be a Fields medalist to combine that observation with the rate of change conversation we had earlier and understand what next year's model might be capable of. It might be a fully capable Terry Tao grad student. Level 4 and 5, can't see that far into the future. And I think they are a little further off. We've got enough to grapple with levels 2 and 3 right now. And I think anyone who's telling you they know what's going to happen out there at level 4 and 5 is someone you should probably be a little skeptical of. The best places I can point you for that kind of conversation is to really good speculative fiction. This is really the domain of visionary sci-fi authors, and not yet the domain of scientists and technologists like me. So here's the rest of that line from the New York Times article on Lee Sedol. Lee Sedol was one of the world's top Go players, and his shocking loss to an AI opponent was a harbinger of a new unsettling era. It may not be a happy ending. And for Lee Sedol, it wasn't a happy ending. And for Tim Gowers, who sees that machines are going to be able to do what he had to struggle to do as a human, it isn't a happy ending, because for both of those individuals, they have constructed an identity, a self-narrative that is, grounded in, I am the best entity in the known universe at functional analysis, at playing the game of Go. And so stepping into a world where, previously they were extremely proud of that, and now people are going to say, yeah, I mean, that's cool, but like my laptop's better than you. That's really hard. And this is a transition that is going to hit many of us as researchers. If you work in the academy, if you work with academics, you may have noticed that some of us have egos, and it's going to be really hard on those egos when everybody knows my laptop's smarter than you, and that skill that you used to have that was so unique and valuable is now commoditized. Intelligence has become commoditized. Specialized skills have become commoditized. I get it. I'm extremely sympathetic to Lee Sedol. I'm extremely sympathetic to Tim Gowers. However, there's another side to this story. And the other side to this story is, instead of looking at individual dots on that plot on the right, look at the shift of the whole distribution. Humanity was stuck in a rut of only being able to play Go at this level, and we've been in that rut for 70 years and probably much longer. We just don't have records. Training with AI shifted the whole distribution by basically an entire standard deviation. The worst professional Go players now are better than the best of the previous 70 years. So while that's really hard if you're Lee Sedol, it is amazing if you are literally everybody else on the planet Earth, because you now have access to a tutor, an exocortex, a hyper-intelligent buddy who can help you accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. So this transition will be difficult for the most exceptional humans because they will have to give up some of their exceptionalism, but it will be transformative and empowering for all the rest of us. I'm not Terry Tao. I am not Tim Gowers, but now I have access to a machine that in some ways is as smart as Tim Gowers. And that would allow me to do things that I would never be able to do on my own. So I'm putting in a plug for my Substack here, where I go into these issues in a little bit more detail. But the one thing I did also want to end with is thinking about the ethics of these machines that in some areas are as smart or smarter than humans. Especially in the context of education, the first knee-jerk reaction the Academy had to ChatGPT was like, oh no, kids are going to cheat on essays. And turns out students cheating on essays isn't novel. It's not specific to AI. It's been going on for a while. But this was a really easily accessible affordance to cheat on your essay. And so people talk about, well, we need detectors, we should ban AI. And I actually think that's just like totally wrong-headed. The technology is there. Students need to learn how to use it. They're going to be using it in their lives and their careers, and there's no avoiding it. So trying to ban such an empowering technology seems short-sighted and foolish to me. What we actually have to recognize is that the question we've got here is a question of values, not technology. So imagine a world where we have an AI that could actually do anything a human can do, any cognitive task. I don't see that world coming anytime soon. I think there'll be several cognitive tasks that AI can do better than us, but not everything. But let's just, as a thought experiment, say AI can do everything for us. Then we have a choice to make with any cognitive task we're given. Do I keep this for myself and do it for myself, or do I outsource it to the AI? And so if I take my first-year history essay and I write it, and then I ask the AI to critique it, that's a pretty intelligent, empowering use of the AI. I'm getting immediate feedback. I can integrate. I can iterate with the AI now. I can fight with it. I'm like, no, I don't think your comments there are right. I think I'm right and you're wrong. And I'm learning. But I could use that same technology to say, hey, just write my essay for me. Go, and I'll take the B-. And that's a really, really terrible use of the technology, because I've robbed myself of the opportunity to learn. When I talk with students, I tell them that, like, if you do that, it's like going to the gym and watching other people work out and then wondering why you're not getting any more fit. Learning has to be a struggle. If you're not struggling, you're probably not learning. This technology can help you in your struggle, just like a good trainer can help you get fit faster and in a way that's safer and healthier. So if you use the affordances of the technology to take you closer to being the person you want to be, that's really smart. And if you use it to cheat yourself of the opportunity to learn, ultimately, you're going to be the one who pays the price for that. So in an era where you have access to a super intelligence in some areas, how you use that actually becomes a question of human values. And that's not a conversation for a technologist like me to lead. That is a conversation for humanists. And we are really lucky at the university that we have a whole faculty full of people who have devoted their lives to studying the humanities. And I see a real renaissance in interest in the humanities and humanistic thinking in an era where a lot of our sort of post-enlightenment rationalist ideas of what it means to be a human are being shaken by a technology. Last slide is our destination. This is where I think we're going, which is to say we are blowing right through the train station and we are continuing to accelerate. I think for at least the next half a decade and maybe longer, we will see continued exponential increase in the capabilities of these models. I think underestimating that would be a mistake. And so I would advise anyone who hasn't had a chance to engage with modern generative AI yet, spend some time experimenting with it, see what it can do for you. It will not be able to do everything. There are things it's terrible at, and there are things it's really good at. And you're really only going to get a visceral sense of that by experimenting with it yourself. Thanks so much for listening to me talk. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was very insightful. And the chat is, I think the audience was so engaged that the chat is actually empty, which is wonderful. I always love it when I see that. But I see that Jamie has a question. So please go ahead, Jamie, and jumpstart our Q&A session.
No, I was clapping.
Oh, well, I have a question to jumpstart our Q&A session then. So Mark, you mentioned some of the ethical considerations and I think, we all struggle with that, whether we use these engines to get us along or make our day more efficient. And so, there's guilt sometimes, and sometimes there's pride and efficiency. But the bottom line is, what are the most significant ethical considerations that we should keep in mind as we continue to develop more advanced AI technologies, and maybe throw in a little bit in there as, how should we use them? Can we use them? Is it ethical to use them? Yeah.
So I think that probably the most important realization is that even though this is a really interesting and powerful technology, it is just another technology. And because it does something that resembles cognition, not human cognition, but its own thing, we're treating it differently than we do other technologies. Like no one ever asked me, like, what are the ethics of using a chainsaw? Like we don't have a course on chainsaw ethics in the philosophy department here. So coming back to viewing it as a tool, albeit a super powerful tool, you recognize that the affordances offered by this technology give me new opportunities to do things that are profoundly ethical and profoundly unethical. And so to put a crisp example on it, I get a lot of emails from vendors, and I don't want to be mean and not answer people's emails, but I also do not want to spend an hour a day answering vendor emails. So I use Microsoft Copilot embedded in Outlook and say, explain I'm no longer Western CIO, and thank them for their time. And so it writes a nice 3-paragraph business letter, and I skim it and change a couple of things, press go, done. At the end of the week, I've maybe saved myself 50 minutes that I can use to do something that I want to do. Let's take the exact same technology, exact same affordance. Nothing has changed. My partner sends me an email about one of our children, and I go and press the Copilot button. Right. And when I say that in person, people sort of like gasp and they're like, "Oh, you're a horrible person. I hate you." The technology hasn't changed. The use case using AI to answer an email hasn't changed. All that's changed is the context modulo my values and hopefully your values too. And so the conversation has to be back to, what are your values? How do you live those values? And are you using this technology in a way that is consistent with those values? And those are not things that we typically teach in like a computer science curriculum, but we do teach them in, say, a philosophy curriculum.
Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Jane Toswell. I see Jane is up on video right now. And Jane, thanks you for learning a lot here. She's very grateful. Her question is, can you be any more specific about what AI cannot do? She's thinking in terms of jobs and fields that are likely to be extinct in the near future, or that those might take off. And feel free to add some clarity to that, Jane, if you want. But I think, Mark, is that do you get that one?
Was there anything you wanted to add, Jane?
Sorry, I worry about my internet access. Yeah, I was thinking in two different directions, what's going to collapse and what's going to take off.
Okay, so again, I can't see the future, and the technology we have right now is pretty brittle, and it can do amazing things, but it still requires human supervision. You know, Terry Tao deliberately characterized it as, hey, this is a mediocre graduate student, but not someone ready to be fully independent. It's possible we end up with models that are good enough to be largely independent. I think what will collapse is a lot of stuff that we didn't like doing anyways. White collar drudge labor, you know, sorting a budget into an Excel spreadsheet and breaking it down. And so I think a lot of that we're going to be able to automate. Where I am fairly certain there will be like almost no automation is in high touch human interaction domains. So even though this technology is super cool, we can't undo millions of years of evolution. We're primates. Interacting with other primates, especially in person, affects us in ways that evolution conditioned us that we cannot get around. Interacting with a machine is cool. I kind of worry about the trend towards anthropomorphism in these machines, and I hope we sort of like take a step back from that and keep that distinction. But even with anthropomorphized AI, humans are always going to crave other human interaction. When I listen to John Coltrane, I'm not just listening to like a saxophone. I don't want to listen to a computer synthesized saxophone. I'm listening to a human being telling me about his life experience, struggle with heroin addiction, his partner, who is an amazing harpist, and like all of that's coming through, and that's the joy of it for me. So people worry about AI generated art, and I think if you're a digital artist, it is a lot more concerning than if you're a traditional artist, because part of the value of an oil painting is an actual human being lit 100 hours of their life on fire to create that, and they're never getting that 100 hours back. That has meaning to me as a human being. They created that at the cost of their finite life to communicate something to me. And just because I can generate a whole bunch of stuff with an AI, like that's cool, that's a neat image, but it doesn't have the same visceral impact for me. So I think anywhere where there's that human connection, that human element, we're going to be okay. Bringing that into terms of the academy, I think we're going to see something really interesting happen. And this is probably heresy. So Jane, keep this. We're mentally prepared for our teaching mission to be a little bit eroded, right? We saw the massively online course thing. There's all these ed tech things. And we've sort of grown up with that. We're like, okay, it's not going to totally replace us, but we get that some of what we do will now be done by technology. We never thought research would be the thing to get disrupted. We thought research was like, oh no, only humans can ever do research. And I can see one possible future, not necessarily the future, but one possible future where machines are just so much better than us at research in some areas. And this isn't just me, right? This is Tim Gowers and Terry Tao, Fields medalists, saying, yeah, like within 5 years, humans won't do math anymore. Machines will do math and we won't even be able to understand it. So I see research being really disrupted, and I see our teaching mission becoming critically important, not that we're the guardians of knowledge, but that we are a place where young people come to interact with older people who have wisdom to give them and other young people, and sort of like going back to the very, very earliest ideas of the academy. And I think that's the future that we could, with, you know, non-zero probability, inhabit. So what will collapse is boring intellectual drudgery. What will continue to have value is human connection.
And creativity.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mark. Thanks, Jane, for that great question. Our next question comes to us from Eaton. And so Eaton is very thankful for sharing these developments and for you being so enthusiastic about this, Mark. So his question is, and this is a concept that I'm familiar with when it comes to research parks. We did a European tour last year, and some of the parks there had digital twins, and it took me a little bit to get my head around that. But very good concept. But now Eaton has asked us, how far, in your opinion, are we from creating digital twins for human beings? You touched on the survey example, but in terms of general human response to stimuli with or without interaction with other digital twins, is this something that is on the horizon? Very interested to hear your answer, Mark.
Absolutely. So yeah, the survey result shows that we can create not digital twins, but like digital cardboard cutouts of humans. And if you're looking at a whole population of humans, or like, with your glasses off and squinting, it looks enough like actual human beings that you can get statistically valid survey results. Does that
Great.
mean that I can simulate an individual human? That is a whole different kind of problem. And whether you believe you can do that or not actually has like deep ontological and epistemological elements to it, where you have to sort of pick a philosophy, right? There are philosophers who will argue that every human being is unique because our life experience is unique. So how could any two actually ever be the same? And there are other philosophers who will convincingly argue that like there's only like 10 archetypes of a human, and we just think we're snowflakes, and really we're actually just one of these archetypes with like a slightly different colored hat, and that's it. And so those are extreme positions, and there's lots of positions in between. If you believe the first position, it will be very hard for an AI to ever truly simulate a human being. If you believe the second position, then you're probably thinking, well, we're pretty close already. I just, I prompt the AI the right way and it starts interacting like a human. All of that said, those are interesting barroom philosophy discussions. I come back to, even if a human can be really convincingly simulated by a machine, we're still going to want to interact with other humans. Where I see human-based digital twins being extremely exciting is in the field of biomedicine. If we're already getting to the point where we have systems that know enough about our genetic makeup and our physiology from measurements that are taken, that we can simulate, here's how these drugs are going to react for this particular individual. So from a precision medicine standpoint, I'm really, really excited about that. But that's sort of at the physiology level and down. At the level of psychology, don't know. It's an open question if we can create true digital twins.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you, Eaton, for that question. Our next question comes from Hakan. And Hakan is echoing Jane's thoughts, and also, like everybody else on here, it's truly been an enlightening session. Thanks you for the presentation. His question is around privacy aspect using AI, and this is very important for their group because Hakan works with partnerships and private industry. So he's asking, how concerned should we be about AI accessing critical information and knowledge? If this is a valid concern, what best practices would you recommend when using AI to generate answers to professional questions and problems?
Thank you so much for asking this question. As a former CIO, this is something I worry about a lot. And so the way to think about this, it is kind of like for the values question, this is just another technology. It's a really cool one, a really powerful one, but just because it's the ChatGPT website you've loaded up doesn't mean that all of your data hygiene practices that you would use with any other cloud-based web service are all of a sudden out the window. Like, oh, just because it's AI now. So my advice is treat it like you would any other piece of cloud-based software. if you have a data sharing agreement with that company and you have corporate policies that say you are allowed to put this data here, then, by all means, you can put business confidential data in there. If you don't have both of those things, then you should put nothing confidential in there. So for example, here at Western, if you are logged into the Microsoft tenant and you go to copilot.microsoft.com, you get a version of Microsoft Copilot that is covered under our data sharing agreement, and anything you would feel comfortable putting into OneDrive or Outlook, you can put into that version of Copilot. So I am comfortable putting business confidential data in there because Microsoft already has our business confidential data and it stays in a Canadian data center, all that stuff. There's a lot of things I would not put into ChatGPT because Western doesn't have an institutional agreement with ChatGPT. For people from the Western community, I'm going to put a website in the chat there. There's a link on that website that says, which model should I use? And it actually breaks this down depending on your use case.
Wow. Thank you so much. Great question, great answer. And once again, I think we've all learned something. Our next question is from Jamie Rees, and this is what he says. I'm very happy for the humanities resonance that comes with the development of AI, but I believe there is also a rediscovery of philosophical concepts. For example, Boolean factors are intrinsic to programming, but George Boole isn't very well known. What are your thoughts about the rediscovery of the humanities?
Thank you, Jaime. I'm a computer scientist, so of course I know Boole. But I don't know. I think we are on the precipice of a big transformation in society, including the academy. The questions that keep me up at night right now aren't technical questions. There are some of those. They're humanistic questions. And so I hear that from our young people too. The questions I get from undergraduates are not, how do I build my own chatbot? How do I do my own startup? I get a little bit of that, but way less than I would expect. The questions I get are sort of what does it mean to be a human now? If the machine's smarter than me at math, that was my thing. So that's Tim Gowers or Lee Sedol. Playing Go was my thing, and now everyone's got a laptop that's better than me. And you can look back a generation to Kasparov being beaten by Deep Blue at chess, and the headline in the 90s was "Humans will never play chess again." And then I look at my teenagers and their friends, and they're chess nerds. They play chess way more than my generation ever did, and they're not at all threatened by the fact that their iPhone running Stockfish can crush all of them at chess because they're interested in playing chess with other humans as a social thing. So there's all these really cool social experiments happening right now. There is so much to study and so much to understand, and so much of this is the same, technology transitions, even though this is a big one. There have been other technology transitions. Smart people like McLuhan have written on this. I think there's going to be a rediscovery, not of the humanities by humanists, because they sort of already know what's there, but there's going to be a rediscovery of the centrality of humanistic thinking by a lot of disciplines and people who just hadn't had the opportunity to experience that, because those questions that once seemed kind of abstract are now all of a sudden no, this is visceral.
Yeah, so that's great. Thank you so much. I do have another question, Mark. And so we always hear about are machines going to replace humans? What are we going to do? And so I don't know what the stats are in that or what the predictions are, or as you mentioned earlier, we can't predict the future, but we can make a strategic guess sometimes. But, for this audience, what skills should we focus on developing to complement or work alongside of these technologies as they progress? Because things have changed. I'm just wondering, one time it was coding and other things. And now we know we can get AI to generate a code. So where do we go from here? What's our career pathway look like if we're starting out, considering that AI has advanced so much?
For skills, I think the most important attribute for success in the next decade is going to be attitude. And if you love your job exactly the way it is right now and you don't ever want anything to change, the next 10 years are going to be very difficult for you. If you are open to learning new things, or even better, if you are excited about learning new things and being agile, you will have the opportunity to have more impact as an individual than you could ever have imagined. So, if the technology delivers on what it could be capable of, it empowers all of us. Jan LeCun, the head of AI at Meta and a prof at NYU, was on a podcast just last week where he's like the right way to think about this is, if you want, you're going to have an army of AI assistants who can help you with anything. And so now every human is actually going to be a manager, not a manager of humans. You're going to be a manager of this little AI army. So long-term strategic thinking, and the most valuable thing is going to be soft skills, the ability to interact with other human beings, to compromise, to find solutions, because we're just not going to allow machines to start governing us overnight. There's always going to be that human connection. So soft skills are going to be incredibly valuable. Some hard skills will retain value, and we still need senior software engineers, but now I worry about how do I get a senior software engineer when the machine is actually better than any junior software engineer. We're not quite there yet, but I can see that soon. But you have to have juniors to get seniors. So how do we manage all of this so that there is, instead of creating human suffering, we use the technology to ameliorate it. And that's not easy. It's really, really hard. And it's our collective obligation as a society in the decade ahead. So focus on soft skills, focus on learning and an attitude of openness to change and to trying things, because most of what I have said today, if we reconvene a year hence, probably a lot of it's going to be out of date and wrong, and things will have changed yet again. So the pace of change is going to be fast. If that thrills you, the future is going to be amazing. If it terrifies you, the future is going to be terrifying.
Wow, thank you. That's very comforting for those of us who focus on social skills and attitudes and learning. And to that point, we do have some practitioners in the park who focus on change, and Sarah will actually send out a link. Nurdan has joined us in the park, and she's going to be giving a seminar on change next week. And so we don't want to overtake this session by announcing that, but Sarah will share that with you, because that's an important part of our go forward. And so she is a practitioner, Nurdani, and so Sarah will share that link in everything she sends out after this session. So one more question, not one more, there may be many, but right now we're taking a question for Magdalene. And I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. I know that, Yami, I pronounced yours wrongly, and sorry about that. But to Magdalene's question, she's very thankful for the insightful presentation. As an educator, she'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences on whether or not you faced challenges in redesigning student evaluations, given that students now have access to AI. Or has this not affected the assignments that was developed before AI? Personally, she's had to tweak the ones that were in place before AI, and she'd like to hear your perspective on AI in the educator sector.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the most important response is what I said earlier about teaching values. And I've spent a lot of time in the last 8 months talking to Ministry of Education and K-12 school boards in Ontario. And my number one message to them is, when you're talking about AI literacy, it has to come back to teaching kids to be mindful about how they use this. So back to that, what are your values? Is this making you the person you want to be, or is this taking you off that path? And that's the only intervention that fundamentally is going to work. If I wag my finger really hard and say you shouldn't do that, you're like, I've got teenagers at home. I know how effective that is, and so that's not a solution. In terms of evaluation, it has had like massive impact on assessment. And again, it's been a couple of years, so you can now look in the literature and see where people who are experts on assessment have begun to write and do studies on this. And I defer to that. My personal experience has been that it really very much depends on the context of the course. If I were teaching English 101, English composition 101, we'd be writing the exam the old-fashioned way with pen in the classroom, because my job is to make sure that you can string together a coherent, maybe even a good sentence and a paragraph. And I need to know that you have learned how to do that. The fact that you know how to outsource it to ChatGPT, that's cool. But if you've only ever outsourced it, you'll never be able to identify good writing from bad or do it yourself. So I actually have to see that. But if I'm teaching a fourth-year course on theory of computation, and I've asked for a term paper on a novel topic, and the student wants to use AI to help them do that research and to help them write up the paper, totally okay. I think that is a very, very smart use of it, to use the AI as a partner, as a critic. And that comes with its own set of caveats and pitfalls, because sometimes it's wrong, and sometimes it's really confidently wrong. And you have to have the self-confidence as a student to say, no, I don't agree. I'm right and you're wrong. And that's hard for a lot of students. So there's a lot of additional learning that can happen there. So it really depends on the context of the course, how the assessment changes. The only response that's kind of, pointless is the finger wagging, saying, like, promise me you won't do this on your essay. Well, humans are going to follow incentives. And if the incentive is all my friends are going out tonight and the essay is due tomorrow and I can get a B- by pressing a button, a lot of students are going to press the button.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. And thank you for that question, Magdalene. I see that Sarah has put the workshop in the chat. It's the title, which I had not mentioned, was Master Adaptability in a World of Disruption, which is a great segue into Nerdani's workshop and very much something that we're focusing on here today. The only other question that I have right now, Mark, is around, in some forms, how can we benefit? And so I'm hearing that, this might be able to generate creativity rather than replace it. And so can you share some of your insights on how AI can enhance human creativity rather than replace it? Because we don't want to walk away from any of this negatively. And I'm a big, supporter of AI used in the right context. So can we talk a little bit about how we can enhance human creativity rather than replace it?
So AI frontier models are creative, sort of by whatever metric you want to use, but their creativity is different than human creativity, sometimes shockingly so. And that can be really cool. But what it suggests is that these are complementary approaches to creativity. So you're asking what the best use for AI is. And my favorite use case is, like, let's go all the way back to the foundation of the academy, to Socrates. Socrates was really sure that the best way to teach a human being and to create a virtuous, good citizen human being was through dialogue. And we can't scale that to a classroom where I'm teaching 500 students. And in my own life, I had the really good fortune to become acquaintances with a philosopher named Dan Dennett, who passed away a few months ago. And I enjoyed my email dialogue with him so much. It brought me so much, because he criticized everything I said, because he's much smarter than me. But I can get his opinions and shreds of his thinking through telling Claude or GPT-4, you know, within the framework, like I don't want it to be Dan, but I can say within the framework of American philosopher Dan Dennett, respond to the following thing. And it's not a perfect replacement, but he's dead, so I don't have any other replacement. And it will criticize me in the same ways that Dan would as a human, that I find so valuable, because it's basing its criticism on, okay, here's everything Dan's ever written, here's what Mark just said, and here's how that fits in there. And so I have, and it doesn't have to be Dan Dennett, it can be any other famous historical figure that the AI model knows enough about. Say, okay, inhabit the mind space of this person and criticize the thing I just said. And I will find myself up later than I should be, fighting with an AI because I'm having this really interesting dialogue, and it's creative in a way that I'm not, and I'm creative in a way that's it's not, and that feeds. And by the end of the conversation, I've usually learned something. Sometimes it's as simple as, well, actually, Mark, this is a solved problem in philosophy, and you should just read this book. I didn't even know that book existed, let alone that whole subfield. Like, okay, great, solved. To raising more and more questions that I hadn't even thought to ask.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with us. That's wonderful. So at this point in our schedule, we'd usually be, feeding you and providing you lunch and things like that. And so right now, of course, unfortunately, we're virtual, but I have to say this has been very engaging. Do we have another question from Yami? Let's have a look before I end up. It's a prompt. Explain who. Yami, do you wanna hop on and explain that one to us?
Yeah, just trying to tease Mark. I have met with Mark before. We had these philosophical conversations. So recently read an article, I think it was in the New Yorker. So when we say Boolean, it's intrinsic to Python, for example. That's one of the main programs that the machine learning AI uses. And when we say Boolean, like a lot of scientists uses the word, but they don't know who George Boole was. And he was a mathematician and a philosopher. And what he did, he brought mathematics and logic together. And what he was trying to discover, what he was trying to reason, is whether God uses evil. And that exploration, that philosophical exploration, is pretty much what powers AI now. Mark, tell us something about George Boole and the importance of philosophy on AI.
I am so far out of my depth here that I'm not even going to try. There is an epistemological tower you've created there that I would need a lot of reading and reflection. But I'll tell you what, let's grab a drink and you can tell me what you think.
You can add it to your podcast.
I'm detecting a great relationship here. I keep us informed of what you decide on over that drink. And Mark, good luck with catching up on that topic. So I'm going to close off. I'm conscious of, I've been scanning the audience. I don't see any hands raised. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. We will finish a little earlier, which means you get 30 minutes back in your day. But we'd like to thank you, Mark, for your insightful keynote, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. This is such a wonderful turnout, and the participation truly made this an engaging session. Sarah Dardarian, who's on the call, will be in touch with you soon with the recording of today's session. Keep an eye on your inbox and any other things that are related to this session. So we appreciate your active involvement as an audience, and we hope to see you at future connector sessions, which happen usually monthly during the academic term. We usually go from September to April. And until then, please take care and continue exploring the exciting world of AI. And thank you so much, Mark Daley. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It was a great conversation.
Okay.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
everybody.